You know how Fox has a weird way of counting Simpsons episodes? They refuse to count a couple of them, making the amount of episodes inconsistent. The reason for this is a lost episode from Season 1. Finding details about this missing episode is difficult. No one who was working on the show at the time likes to talk about it. From what has been pieced together, the lost episode was written entirely by Matt Groening. During production of the first season, Matt started acting strangely. He was very quiet, seemed nervous and morbid. Mentioning this to anyone who was present results in them getting very angry and forbidding you to ever mention it to Matt. I first heard of it at an event where David Silverman was speaking. Someone in the crowd had asked him about the episode, and Silverman simply left the stage, ending the presentation hours early. The episode's production number was 7G06. The title was Dead Bart, and the episode labelled 7G06, Moaning Lisa, was made later and given Dead Bart's production code to hide the latter's existence. In addition to getting angry, asking anyone who was on the show about this will cause them to do everything they can to stop you from directly communicating with Matt Groening. At a fan event, I managed to follow him after he spoke to the crowd, and eventually had a chance to talk to him alone as he was leaving the building. He didn't seem upset that I had followed him. Probably expected a typical encounter with an obsessive fan. When I mentioned the lost episode though, all colour drained from his face, and he started trembling. When I asked him if he could tell me any details, he sounded like he was on the verge of tears. He grabbed a piece of paper, wrote something on it, and handed it to me. He begged me to never mention that episode again. The piece of paper had a website address on it. I would rather not say what it was, for reasons you'll see in a second. I entered the address into my browser, and I came to a site that was completely black, except for a line of yellow text, a download link. I clicked on it, and a file started downloading. Once the file was downloaded, my computer went crazy. It was the worst virus I had ever seen. System restore didn't work. The entire computer had to be rebooted. But before doing this though, I copied the file onto a CD. I tried to open it on my now empty computer, and as I suspected, there was an episode of The Simpsons on it. The episode started off like any other episode, but had very poor quality animation. If you've seen the original animation for Some Enchanted Evening, it was similar, but less stable. The first act was fairly normal, but the way the characters acted was a little off. Homer seemed angrier, Marge seemed depressed, Lisa seemed anxious, and Bart seemed to have some genuine hatred and anger towards his parents. The episode was about the Simpsons going on a plane trip. Near the end of the first act, the plane was taking off. Bart was fooling around as you'd expect. However, as the plane was about 50 feet off the ground, Bart broke a window and was sucked out. At the beginning of the series, Matt had an idea that the animated style of The Simpsons world represented life, and that death turned things more realistic. This was used in this episode. The photo of Bart's corpse was barely recognizable. They took full advantage of it not having to move, and made an almost photorealistic drawing of his dead body.
Act 1 ended with a shot of Bart's corpse. When Act 2 started, Homer, Marge, and Lisa were sitting at their table crying. The crying went on and on. It got more pained and sounded more realistic, better acting than you would think possible. The animation started to decay even more as they cried, and you could hear murmuring in the background. The characters could barely even be made out. They were stretching and blurring. They looked like deformed shadows with random bright colors thrown onto them. They were faces looking through the window, flashing in and out so you were never sure what they looked like. This crying went on for all of Act 2. Act 3 opened up with a title card saying 1 year had passed. Homer, Marge, and Lisa were absolutely skeletally thin and still sitting at the table, and there was no sign of Maggie or the pets. They decided to visit Bart's grave. Springfield was completely deserted, and as they walked into the cemetery, the houses became more and more decrepit. They all looked abandoned. When they got to the grave, Bart's body was just lying there in front of the tombstone, looking like it did at the end of Act 1. The family started crying again. Eventually, they stopped and just stared at Bart's body. The camera zoomed in on Homer's face, and according to summaries, Homer tells a joke at this part, but it isn't audible in the version I saw. You can't really tell what Homer is saying. The view zoomed out as the episode came to a close. The tombstones in the background had the names of every Simpsons guest star on them, some that no one had even heard of in 1989, some that haven't even been on the show yet. All of them had death dates on them. For guest stars that died since, like Michael Jackson and George Harrison, the dates were when they would die. The credits were completely silent and seemed handwritten. The final image was the Simpsons family on their couch, like in the intros, but all drawn in hyper-realistic lifeless style of Bart's corpse. A thought occurred to me after seeing the episode for the first time. You could try to use the tombstones to predict the death of living Simpsons guest stars, but there's something odd about most of the ones who haven't died yet. All of their deaths are listed as the very exact same date. You know, for a creepypasta that supposedly claims itself to be the quote-unquote forefather of lost episode pastas, this one was about as bland could honestly be. It's the equivalent of eating a giant block of tofu. There's no flavor, there's no anything to it, it's just literally eating nothing. And that's exactly what this creepypasta is. This creepypasta, for what it is about as inconsistent as it can honestly be. First and foremost, let's actually get into the whole first startup of this. Supposedly about this being a lost episode from season 1, which of course isn't true, because if you actually look at the actual thing, 7G06, you will see that it is a moaning Lisa. Now, Dead Bart, for what it is, doesn't exactly make a whole lot of sense here. I can kind of understand that this was probably made by, according to the story, it says that Matt began to act strangely, very quiet, nervous, and morbid, which I really don't understand the whole concept of morbid, unless that was something that was being done. I do know, however, that Matt, I think, did actually have a breakdown, or was that Walt Disney? Very possibly that might have been Disney, but I'm gonna stick with the whole thing about it actually being Matt. And anybody who knows anything about doing things like animation and all that, it's bound to sit there and take a toll on you, even if it's something that you love doing. This is especially the case when I do creepypasta stories and everything. Like, right now, I just don't feel it, people. I don't feel anything with even doing these kinds of videos. Even my narration and everything is just completely flat, because it's at this point in time that I don't really know how much more I can keep doing these kinds of videos, because in all honesty, it's all pretty much the same. But I'm getting off topic. Let's get to the pasta. The pasta, like I said, is just a bland story, nothing more. Even the description of the episode itself just doesn't make any level of sense. Starting off with the actual startup of the pasta, with everybody acting off. God, what is it with lost episode stories doing this kind of thing? Like, why is it that creepypastas... I know this is like one of the first forefather stories out there, but... to put it bluntly, why does it always have to start up with this? Couldn't it have just started off with, the normal Simpsons intro? I know that's cliche, but still, bear with me here. The idea of, Homer seeming angry or Marge seeming depressed for whatever reason. This right here is just a detail that, in all due honesty, could have completely been taken out. entirely of the story, and it wouldn't have changed much of anything. In fact, the only thing I would have kept in the very startup of this was the episode started off like any other episode but had very poor quality animation. That would have made sense in the long run. And don't even get me started on the whole clicking on a link and it'd just be the worst virus. I mean, I understand you shouldn't go on sketchy websites and download weird crap because you can fuck your computer up. I should know. I'm guilty of this myself, but a lot of things just don't make a whole lot of sense. Why exactly is it, if this is something that Matt Groening himself wound up making and was something that he didn't want to have around, how in the hell would he have gone out of his way and known why in the world would this be something put in online? I mean, more importantly, why exactly would he make something like that? And it's just a major plot hole that doesn't really seem to be answered. So, getting back to the story, like I said, the first part, poor quality animation, again, the rest of this part can easily be taken out, and nothing would change in this, which is already a major problem because it was an inconsistent detail that provides very little to nothing to the actual storytelling itself, and is just a random throw-in just because of the fact that it's just a random throw-in. Now, if this was something a little bit more along the lines of being the intro, if that was something that was the case, then, maybe I could understand that, but it doesn't go into that level of specification, so yeah, that's already a major problem. Now, I will admit that after this specific waste of a spotlight in the story, the whole idea about the Simpsons basically going on a plane trip or whatever it may seem to be, and Bart sitting there and breaking a window like he tends, just Bart being the idiot that he is. This is something that's perfectly fine. But then we get into another level of unnecessary detail about Matt having an idea the animated style of The Simpsons would represent life. Okay, what the fuck does that even mean? It doesn't make a single lick of sense. What do you mean, represented life? How do you make an animation style that represents it unless it's realistic in a way? And that death turn thing, again, this sentence makes absolutely no sense in any way, shape, or form. Maybe if it went into a little bit more detail, like saying, Matt had an idea that the animated style of the Simpsons world ultimately would be a lot more realistic, and then would represent real life itself. If that was the case, then this whole sentence would make a lot more sense, because again, the idea of making an entire episode or something like that being realistic in a sense, like visually, it would make a lot more, it sits well, but this sentence alone just doesn't do much. Supposedly it was used in the episode, yada yada yada, the whole photorealistic drawing of his dead body, which, dear God, people, why? I've seen pictures and the like of people attempting to try and do this, and it's just not scary, people. It's not scary, and it's like the whole took advantage of it not having to move. Okay, what does that even mean? What does it mean? And then, of course, we get to the whole thing where everybody's mourning and yada yada yada, so on and so forth, and then they go to the grave, and then we get the stupidest fucking ending within any Lost episode pasta. About the idea of there being supposedly different death dates, but later on it's revealed that it wasn't, that all the death dates are listed as the same date. This doesn't really add anything. Overall, I know I'm not going into extreme level of specifics. This is because of the fact that I really fucking hate doing these videos. Now, I'm really trying to get myself back into doing narrations and everything, but people, I'm really not sure how much more I want to do these because it's all the damn same. I mean, as many of you should know, I haven't been really uploading a whole lot, so apologies, but I can't keep doing these anymore, people. They're just not fun. They're not interesting. The only ones that are fun are the ones that actively put effort into it, and there's such a dime a dozen that it just... I'm drained, people. I'm fucking drained. This whole thing is just draining for me. Overall, what I can say is that I give this story a 3 out of 10. Nothing really much. Fuck 3 out of 10. I give this a 1 out of 10. That's really all I can honestly say here. Now, I'm gonna move on to the Dark Author. He probably has a much better quality review than I'm honestly gonna have here, so I'm just gonna move on to him. By the way, thanks again to the Dark Author for coming on here. He was the one that provided the video footage for the pasta itself and everything else. So thanks again to him for doing so. I'll leave a link to his channel down below. And with that said, let's go on ahead and move on to Dark's review. Because, like I said, he can do a better review than I can.
Thank you, Shadow Reader, for allowing me to come onto the channel and help cover Dead Bart. But besides the point, here are my opinions on the story. This story is a classic, no doubt. One of the first ever creepypastas to gain proper mainstream fame. This story and many others helped spiral off and inspire other stories like Squidward's Suicide and The Grieving. However, if we take nostalgia out of the equation, I'm not really the biggest fan of this. Squidward's Suicide did a much better job at a lost episode than this. That had more setup, more background. Despite the child murder that is in Squidward's Suicide, that story went into more detail. It really did sound like there was more depth and time put into that story. However, if you want to know my biggest gripe, I can answer it in 2 words. Photo-realistic. Same with hyper-realistic. I don't know who or why that was considered a good option. It just makes your story seem overly edgy and too cliché. Like, what does that even mean, photorealistic or hyper-realistic? I don't see how that emphasizes the horror aspect. It just seems like they're going overboard for the sake of trying to be overly scary. While in my opinion, the true horror parts are the subtle bits, like in the Russian sleep experiment, how it's built up, and then the ending just completely knocks everybody out of their seats. However, I can give this credit for at least trying at a story. The way the character got this episode was, albeit forced, but also, I guess, plausible. If anyone was to have this lost episode, it wouldn't be some flea market, or some random cartridge lying out in the dumpsters outside in the alley. No, it would be the creator himself. So the way they got it from him was realistic. I could buy that. Also, the grammar isn't too poor either. It was coherent enough for me to read with no real issues. But overall, I feel like there could have been much more detail put into this story. The episode itself could definitely be longer. Maybe we could explore some other elements, like the family's reactions to Bart dying. Maybe having an extended scene of them reacting to it after they get off the plane and see his body, instead of just cutting to them all around the dining table. In my opinion, the ending of this story also knocks it down a peg compared to Squidward's Suicide. Squidward's Suicide ended it off, with the character explaining that they are more wary and tend to question things more, while this episode simply ends in a confusing way in my opinion, saying that all of the tombstones read the same date. What does that mean? Everybody's gonna die on the same day? It's not written out yet, or I'm just confused. At least Squidward's Suicide wraps everything up into a package that you can somewhat understand. This though you can't, and it's not even one of those clever endings, where the ending can be interpreted by the viewer's own perspective. Is it the worst creepypasta I've ever seen? No, no way. I certainly think other pastas like Play With Me, Sally, or even if you can count this, Sweet Apple Massacre, are much worse stories compared to it. They are pieces of shit and have no redeeming quality. While this story sucks, in my opinion, it does have some redeeming factors about it. It is one of the original stories, so it has some kind of leeway. It doesn't go so obsessively into the gore, and thankfully, it doesn't feature any sexual assault or rape or anything of that kind, because that is disgusting and does not belong in a story. You can only pull that off if you are very, very careful with that in horror. I would go nowhere near that right now with my skill. Personally, I would probably put this up with Eyeless Jack on my enjoyability level. I hate both stories just about the same. So, those are mine and the Shadow Reader's opinions. We're kicking off the spooky month with a collab that nobody saw coming. We have to kick October off with a bang after all. If you enjoyed this video, and if you enjoyed my voice and narration and help, be sure to like, comment and subscribe to the Shadow Reader, and be sure to like, comment and subscribe to me as well. The Shadow Reader is an amazing guy. He helped inspire my channel in many ways, and overall, I owe part of my channel's success to him. So definitely subscribe to both of us if you haven't already. We did a collab on my channel when he helped me narrate Squidward's suicide. But anyways, I will see you little shadows later, and if any of my docs are in the audience, I'll see you later too. Take care, everybody.
In fear and surprise, as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to thee, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping, horror-driven, nightmarish, gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any day.